please take your seats as we have remarks coming at this time. Everyone, please take your seats. Please welcome to bring remarks Alfonso David, President and CEO of Global Black Economic Forum. Let's give him a hand.
Hello, everyone. It is an honor to be with all of you. First, I want to thank the National Action Network for this invitation, and to the Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you for your voice, your courage, and your consistency over the past several decades. Now, we don't take for granted what it means to have leadership that actually shows up, leadership that actually speaks out, and leadership that stays in the fight. So, Reverend Sharpton, thank you for that. And also, congratulations to the new House of Justice headquarters in Harlem. This is not just a building, it's really an infrastructure for our movement. As you heard, my name is Alfonso David. I am a civil rights attorney. I'm also the president and the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum. And at the forum, we are focused on advancing economic opportunity across 4 key areas: the future of work, the future of wealth, the future of health, and the future of our democracy. We are preparing for one of the most significant and, in fact, the largest convening at this year's Essence Festival of Culture. So if all of you are coming, we look forward to hosting you. We will be talking and engaging with leaders and entrepreneurs and advocates, focusing on how do we move from conversation to action. Now, for today, I want to begin with a truth that I shared on this very stage last year. I came last year and I warned all of you that we were entering into a period of targeted attacks on black businesses, particularly in public contracting. I said that what we were witnessing was not episodic, it was in fact coordinated, it was strategic, and it was rooted in a broader effort to reshape who has access to economic power and who does not. And last year we announced that the Global Black Economic Forum had a report on diverse businesses and contracting, because we understood what's at stake. Unfortunately, the warning has become real. The president issued an executive order about a week and a half ago targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion in federal contracting. And I want to be clear and grounded in what this means, not just for the business leaders that are out there, but what it means for all of us. And let me just be precise. The executive order does not explicitly bar black and brown businesses from participating in federal contracting. What it does, it introduces ambiguity. And what it does so by increasing risk or the perception of risk for businesses to work with black businesses. It requires companies to certify that they are not engaging in what the administration calls racially discriminatory DEI practices. Now, nobody knows what that really means. It's not defined in the executive order. What the goal is to scare people from working with us, to scare people from hiring black businesses, to scare people from working with brown businesses. So what happens? Companies could actually pull back. They could stop negotiating with black and brown businesses. They could try to cancel contracts. This is not because the law has changed. The law hasn't changed. This is not because black and brown businesses are not qualified. They're more than qualified. This is because the administration wants to create uncertainty. And when you create uncertainty, you create fear. And then fear drives behavior. That is the movie that they're playing. Just so we're all clear on what we're watching. And when behavior shifts, opportunity shifts. So just make this real. Federal contracting is about how much you think. How much money do you think the federal government spends every year? Okay, so we're in the right ballpark, billions. $770 billion every year. $770 billion, and approximately 46 of the 770 billion, 46 of that flows through minority businesses. So sit with that for a minute. You have $770 billion that the federal government is spending. $46 billion goes to black and brown businesses. And this executive order is looking to remove that, to take away the $46 billion that are going to black and brown businesses. And again, this is not because the law has changed. This is not because Congress has passed a new resolution. This is because the administration wants to signal to other businesses not to work with us. Now, let's think about who's affected. The contractor who employs people in our very communities. It's the small business that is finally scaling. It's the entrepreneur who has navigated barrier after barrier after barrier, and they're winning. And now they could start losing. And when contracts are pulled back, jobs are lost. When jobs are lost, communities are destabilized. When communities are destabilized, we will all feel it. So when we talk about federal contracting, I want to make sure that we understand this is about us. Even if you don't have a business, this is about all of us. This is a part of a broader pattern. We're seeing lawsuits against institutions that support diversity. We're seeing efforts to redefine inclusion as exclusion. We're seeing opportunities to sort of redefine equity as discrimination. And at the same time, we're seeing public contracts and public contracting under risk. So some of you may not know this, but I took on a recent lawsuit. In Texas, there's a program called the Historically Underutilized Business Program. It's called the HUB program. It has been in existence for more than 35 years. And in Texas, what they did was to create a program. We have a similar program here in New York. Create a program to create opportunities for people of color and for women, because for decades they have been excluded from contracting opportunities. Well, guess what happened? The controller in Texas decided to issue a regulation and remove businesses that are owned by women and businesses that are owned by people of color from the program. So every single business that is owned by a woman, every single business that is owned by a person of color, he sought to remove them from the program. More than 16,000 businesses are affected. 16,000. So what are we going to do? We're not going to sit back. We sued them. We're not going to allow this to happen. We have fought too long and too hard to make sure that black and brown businesses have a seat at the table. So we have filed a landmark lawsuit in Texas against the controller and against 5 other state agencies for violating the law. Because remember, the controller is not a part of the legislature. The controller can't just simply rewrite the law. You have to go back to the legislature. And in Texas, the legislature rejected any attempts to change the law. So we are now suing the controller and all of the agencies that are violating the law. Now, lawsuits are a part of our response, but advocacy is also a part of our response, and that's where all of you come in. We have to be disciplined about how we use our economic power. And I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. We cannot separate our values from our spending. You have values. All of you in this room have values. Don't separate it from your pocketbook. If a company does not respect our communities, we should not support that company. If a business chooses to retreat from equity, we should reevaluate that company. If a business chooses to retreat from equity, redefine it. They're not quite sure what it is. We can say we're not quite sure if we want to spend our money with you. And markets respond to incentives. And we have the ability to shape those incentives. So that's the first thing I ask you to continue doing. Make sure that your values are aligned with your behavior. The second is I hope that we will continue to show up. Show up for each other. Show up for the business, show up for the bodega. Show up for the local business. When you need a plumber, when you need dry cleaners, think about who you're going to. Think about where you're spending your business and make sure we're showing up for each other. I want to close by saying this. The president has issued a lot of executive orders. And what you will often not hear in the press, executive orders are not laws. The president cannot issue a law. Only Congress and the legislature can pass the law. Now, the president can issue executive orders anytime he wants. But those executive orders have to comply with statutes, and they have to comply with the Constitution. That is why you're seeing all of these lawsuits. So remember, every time you hear in the press, oh, the president has issued an executive order, your first thought should be, well, that's nice, but the executive order doesn't change the law. This moment is not about confusion, it's about control. And it's about who has access to opportunity and who does not. So as we think about the next steps, as we think about showing up for our communities, as we think about making sure we're separating the noise from the facts, understand that change will not wait for us to be comfortable. It requires us to be clear, to be resilient, and to be purposeful. And to think about this moment, please remember that leadership is not simply about managing a transition. It's about inspiring it. We are supposed to be inspiring the transition that we want to see. It's about positioning ourselves in alignment with our values. Once again, that word, our values, that will outlast the noise of this moment. It's about recognizing our collective strength, our networks, our voices, and our commitment. And we can make sure we are redefining what justice and opportunity looks like for generations yet to come. Now, you all know this. Let's remember that no weapon formed against us shall prosper. Now, let's act like it. Thank you.
Hello, 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 hello. So family, Nan family, I am here to introduce us today because we all need to know when there are champions out there fighting for us. And so the man that is about to speak is indeed that human. He has been out there advocating for equity for us in finance and creating a playing field so that we can have more opportunity and inclusion in the financial sector. Jacob Waltauer is the CEO of Blueprint Capital. And so we are going to hear from him next, and I want us to give him a huge Nan resounding applause and welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're my sister, and you know, she's one of those people I can reach at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning when I need advice, and there's nobody better in the game of PR than Rachel Nordlinger. Let me first say thank you to Reverend Sharpton, National Action Network, and to all of you. It's truly an honor for me to be here on this stage. And when I say it's an honor, it means that I have to get a little bit personal, because the zip code that I was born in, the family that I was born into, never would have dictated that I would be on this stage. I was born to Barbara and Jacob Waltauer. Barbara had an 11th grade education, and Jacob had a 7th grade education. And they met each other, fell in love, married, had 3 wonderful children, put them all through college through their hard work. Ultimately, one day, decided to start their own business. It became hugely successful. They expanded from restaurants into real estate, and I had the privilege of one day pulling down a sheet and seeing the name Walthour on a street sign. And so, I want to make sure that this moment is very clear, because I dedicate that to them. And but for their guidance and the grace of God, I simply would not be here. One of the things that my parents taught me and my siblings very, very early on is that it's not about you, right? It's always about something bigger than you. And so when they became successful financially and began to really experience what we call in business today profits, they reinforced that lesson. And those profits were not just for our family, they were for the community. And so they supported the local basketball teams, and they supported the local Little League teams. They supported the churches. They provided for people's families when they lost loved ones. They believe that when you're successful, you have a responsibility to recycle those profits back into your community. And make no mistake about it, when you hear Alfonso talk about us as people of color being isolated from economic opportunities, that is the goal. Because when we have money, we're dangerous, right? There's so much that we can do for each other. We now no longer have to rely on other people. I received a phone call a couple of days ago, and Reverend Sharpton has been on my mind and on my heart, principally because the passing of Reverend Jackson. And the passing of Reverend Jackson meant that a man who wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning to work out and who is tireless in his efforts to support us now had even more weight to carry on his back. And on behalf of my family, I said to myself, how can we be supportive? I went from that boy in a small town in a house where we had a gas oven. And we woke up in the morning and we all hovered around the gas oven because that's where the heat was, right? And then we went off to school. Well, life got a little better since then because of my education, because of the support that my parents gave me, but also because of the work that Reverend Jackson and Reverend Sharpton have done over the years to clear a path for me. So on behalf of my family, both my family that gave birth to me and my family that I work with each and every day at Blueprint Capital Advisors, I want to announce today, because we all know that the House of Justice is looking at building a new home, that we're going to up our commitment to that House of Justice to $100,000. So Kara, Rev, the check is in the mail. I want to thank you for all the work that you do for all of us. And on behalf of my parents, I just want to say thank you all for the honor to be here and the honor to speak to you.
Some of you forget where you come from and forget how you got there and act like you got there because you were qualified or that you had a good resume. But some of us had to pay a price for your resume to even be read. Some of us had to take nights in jails and licks upside the head or shut out of boardrooms like Byron so you could walk down red carpets and act like you got there by yourself. So I received this award with a special place in my heart and on my shelf, because I'm getting it from a freedom fighter who never forgot where he came from and how he got there. Yes, we've come a long way. We've had now a black president and now a black vice president, but we still can get shot down and have to march to get a case in court. We still can get shut out of boardrooms. We're still doubly unemployed in a good economy. So we're gonna have to keep marching. And I thank not only my family, a mother that raised me by herself, but I thank that lady at the end of the march that knows she won't be on TV that night and knows her name will never be in the paper, but she believed in me enough to get at the end of the line and make me look good. Because Dr. King used to say, if you call a march and no one shows up, you're just going for a walk. And I want to thank those that marched with me. 32 years ago, here in Los Angeles, we marched. And then many years later, with George Floyd and others, we're still marching. And I'm gonna keep marching, I'm gonna keep agitating, and I'm gonna keep going. Until we don't have to do it anymore. Eddie, known you a long time, Mariah, Chris and your kids. And I promise you this, the only thing that I really live for is I get up with this dream that every bigot, every racist, everyone in this country that hates will say, damn, he's up again.
How's everybody? So we just wanted to greet you all and thank you for allowing us in. Yes, sir. We're really cool. Yeah. We was here.
They were on the plantation.
Our family was on the plantation. Wow. And that's, of course, that's the slave house. It was one of the slave houses. Sir, it's been 13 years.
That's right.
Good to
How
see
you been?
Doing fine. Right, so that's that. We,
Alexander Shaw. How many slaves were staying there?
I have no idea.
This is where they would have the slavery.
Yeah, that's when exactly. That was exactly.
The two people that most influenced my life was from South Carolina, James and Jesse. Jesse right up the road with me. I went for his mother's funeral. Jesse walked to my mother's casket. From South Carolina. That's the balance of my life, James.
Yeah.
Civil rights, shoulders.
But also where your people come too.
Literally.
Yeah, right.
And where I grew Jesse was from James, where I started president.
Yeah.
And James had died December 25th. He died Christmas Day, '06. And they came.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back President and Founder, Reverend Al Sharpton.
All right. I ran over to the women's luncheon, but I wanted to be back to do this because it's important we hear from people throughout the country that may run to lead the country. And we need to know and hear for ourselves. Before I bring on our next person who we're honored to have, when he came in, he brought me back a couple of weeks ago. And as you know, Reverend Jesse Jackson was my mentor. The last 4 or 5 conventions, he was here till he was too ill to be here and talked about how he had trained us and he named our headquarters the House of Justice. And I thought about the one part that was missing in his services was that there was a man that stood with him when most of the establishment in New York would not stand with him. And he's a man that helped to raise and nurture me. Wouldn't be a Nan without him. And I'm glad he's here at the convention that he helped make possible. Give a hand, Bishop Herbert Daughtry. Bishop Herbert Daughtry. I was amazed at all these folks that loved Jesse, that we didn't even see them until, but Reverend Daughtry was there in Brooklyn. In fact, they had the meetings at House of Lord Church because the folk in Harlem didn't want Jesse in Harlem in '84. I'm telling you what I know. Karen Daughtry will tell you that I'm telling the truth. So I want to acknowledge him and say publicly we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. Our next guest, I never have seen anyone stand up stronger around the questions of deportation and stand up around vice than this governor, and gave not only respect to Reverend Jackson, but respect to the whole civil rights movement. And I wanted to have this conversation with him, and I'm so glad he facilitated being with us. He is the governor of the state of Illinois. And I don't have to read all his background. You know him, I know him. In fact, I saw a guy when I was at O'Hare Airport. He said, "I saw you with JB." I thought JB was James Brown. Now it's JB Pritzker. Give it up, Governor JB Pritzker. Look like you brought your fan club with you.
It's my new name, James Brown Pritzker.
Let me start by asking you, you set a tone when they were doing the deportation ICE raids that I think resonated around the country. And give us what led you to taking such a defiant tone when it was not at that time politically polled that it would go either way. What were you thinking? Why did you do it?
Well, Reverend, it wasn't just about deportation, although that's what you heard when I stood up to him. But I want you to know that I've been standing up to him since, I got elected during his first term. And I must tell you, this is somebody you cannot trust. He lies consistently over and over and over again. So I knew when he got reelected that it was going to be bad. It was bad the first term, but you could see he was heading into a second term to really take away people's rights. And the first thing he did was go after, ICE, CBP invading my city. Before people saw it in Minneapolis, they did it in Chicago. We had people shot and killed by ICE and CBP. They were tackling black and brown people, U.S. citizens, and detaining people and taking them in. It wasn't really about deportation. It wasn't really about immigration. It's this whole administration's view about people of color. Evidence of that, I might add, is just look at his cabinet. He has one black person in the entire cabinet of the United States. 4 total out of 22 are people of color. One black person. I have to tell you, I knew early on, and I can tell you one other thing about him. In 2020, I'm going to just tell you this quick story. In 2020, I got elected in 2018, took office in 2019. I didn't talk to him for the first year, not because I didn't, have opportunities or didn't want to. It was just, there wasn't anything that I needed to pick up the phone and call him about. By the way, every speech I gave when I ran for office was, everything we care about is under siege by a racist, misogynist, homophobic, xenophobic president in Washington, D.C. So I don't think he much liked me from the beginning. But in 2020, I called him up at the beginning of COVID, very beginning of COVID, and I said, Mr. President, we need your help. We need 2 million N95 masks, and we need 4,000 ventilators. And we need them right away because I had people already in the hospital and dying before many other states. And he said, okay, we'll do that, but you've got to go on the Sunday shows and tell everybody that I did this for you and how much you like me. This is a national emergency. People are dying, and the president is essentially extorting. So I said, actually, he put Peter Navarro on the phone. You may remember him. He's still around. Went to prison, came back. He's in the Trump administration. Some others should still be going to prison, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, Peter Navarro got on the phone, and I said, hey, how fast can you get us the stuff? And he said, we can do it in Trump time. And of course, I was trying to get it, so I didn't want to be insulting. So I said, that sounds very fast. How fast is that? And he said, well, we can get it to you by Sunday. So it was about 4 days. I said, that's terrific. That's great. What they sent was nothing of what I asked for. They sent me broken BiPAP machines, not ventilators. They sent me surgical masks, not N95 masks. There's a big difference. And so, I went on those Sunday shows, and I didn't say nice things about the president, as you can imagine. And look, the man has been a thorn in the side of working families across the United States, the most vulnerable people in the United States. And I'm just not going to let him do it to the people of Illinois. I said, when he took office again, I said, you come for my people, you come through me. So I've tried to stand up against him and for the people of Illinois every single day.
Tell us what led you've been successful in business, what led you into public service?
Thank you for asking that, because I think people overlook the fact that that I actually came from a family of people who had served the public interest let me start with, my family were refugees a few generations ago. And I've always felt like, and every generation of my family's felt like, we owe something to this country. My grandfather served in the Navy. My father, also a crypto analyst in the Navy. My uncle, my brother-in-law, my cousin, and we have a lot of people who served in the military. My sister was the Commerce Secretary for Barack Obama, and I'm governor of the state of Illinois. And that impetus to be engaged in public service, I was also the chairman of the Human Rights Commission before I became governor. The impetus to be engaged in public service really comes from a belief in this country, a patriotism that I know the Republicans say Democrats aren't patriotic. We're the most patriotic. We believe in this country more than they do. They're tearing down the laws. They're operating in unconstitutional fashion. They elected somebody who is ruining our democracy. And so I think it's now more than ever, it's on all of us, I might add. It's on all of us to stand up for the future of our country, doing some public service. At a minimum, everybody has to go vote in this coming election.
You've said that affordability and economic empowerment go hand in hand. Tell us about your medical debt relief initiative and what it means for families.
So I think many of you know people, or you yourselves are suffering from some debt that you took on because you had a medical emergency, something you didn't expect. Maybe you were in a car accident or some other thing overtook you, a disease of some sort, right? And then when you're finally better, you're left with an enormous medical bill. And we have millions of people in the state of Illinois with medical debt that they can't pay and maybe never will pay. Probably will never pay. So we actually, starting with Cook County, the first county, Cook County, Illinois, the first county in the country to implement medical debt relief program. And then we took it statewide. And now we've eliminated $2 billion of people's medical debt. For 1 million people in the state of Illinois, we've eliminated their medical debt. And you don't have to do anything to get it either. You just get a letter in the mail. We do it without you asking. We just go and we buy the debt from the hospitals, from the collection agencies. We can often get it for 1 penny on the dollar. So we can get this done, and every state ought to be doing this. We were one of the very, very first states. We were the first county in the country to do it, and it really has made a difference. Think about how that weighs on your credit report and on your credit rating when you go to, rent an apartment or anything else in life and you need credit. And there you've got something sitting there. It wasn't your fault. It's the fault of a healthcare system that doesn't give people a doctor and give them healthcare that they can afford.
While you're on your programs, because I think this is stuff delegates from around the country can bring back to their governor, and we have several governors here, but tell me about your BUILD program. Your administration reported that black families are 8 times more likely to lose their homes, and your BUILD initiative has focused on new construction, but buildings take years, so beyond cutting red tape for developers, what's your plan to provide a direct and immediate help for black families being priced out or living in unsafe conditions?
So I want to say there are 3 important pieces of, if you want to address the housing crisis in this country, there are 3 important pieces that have to be addressed. It used to be we only talked about 2 of them, but we got to talk about all 3, and here's what they are. I think we all know that there are far too many unhoused people in this country. And we actually put an initiative together, Home Illinois, that is tackling this problem statewide. And it's an initiative that we've got city by city by city. People are adopting the program that we put forward. And we put $250 million into that program to make sure that we're providing people with flexible housing or with initial housing so that they can move into something more permanent or into permanent housing. So that's dealing with the unhoused. That's 1/3 of the problem, or one piece of the problem. A second piece of the problem is what everybody calls affordable housing. And that, of course, is housing that the federal government has been the most involved in for so many years, that's providing housing for people who have very low income or moderate incomes. And that's something the federal government hasn't been doing a great job of, but at least the federal government's been involved in it. Today, 0 from the Trump administration on affordable housing, 0. So that's created a crisis. Now, I'm going to add the third problem on top of it, which is what I'll call middle housing. As you know, people who make $75,000 to $175,000 a year can't afford to buy a home anymore. That used to be where you could afford to buy a home. You can't anymore. You can't. It's unaffordable. And we have to address that problem, because it's now the case that first-time home buyers, average age, 40 years old. Now, most of us have kids when we're 30s or 20s, and you want to be able to buy a house at some point early enough so you can raise your family in a house. If you earn enough, like 75 to 170, you ought to be able to do that. People can't do it anymore. So we've got to address that problem too. So the BUILD initiative has components of all three of that, but the biggest thing is we've got redlining that occurred many years ago that's still in existence in so many towns and counties. We've got to overcome those. Those are local restrictions on people building or acquiring a home. We've got to get rid of those. We've got to make it so that you can, an accessory dwelling unit, maybe you've got on your property an additional building that could be rental housing for somebody, but that community isn't allowing it. Why? Because they don't want, and I'm going to put air quotes around this, the wrong people to rent. And we've got to do away with those restrictions and those barriers. So that's an example of what we're trying to do in the state of Illinois. We also, you mentioned it, and maybe you were dismissing it, but I got to say, there are a lot of people, I bet people in this audience here today, who think about, they've got a job, they've maybe got enough money to make an investment, they'd like to invest in maybe a fourplex or a duplex, they'd like to rent it out. It's often the case that there are so many restrictions in a community that you can't even rent out a duplex or a fourplex in a community that you live in. And maybe it's a property you live in, one of the four of the fourplex. We've got to do away with those restrictions. We need 225,000 new homes in the state of Illinois by 2030. 225,000. We can do probably half of that just by alleviating some of the restrictions. And the other half, in part, by incentivizing small developers. I'm not talking about the big names that you've heard, but just small developers in their own communities trying to do something to add some housing. We could take care of most of the problem if we just get rid of the barriers and the red tape.
Let me ask you about your partnership with your Lieutenant Governor Stratton, who just won the Democratic nomination. That alliance, you work together. Obviously, she's your Lieutenant Governor. You worked on some of these issues that we've talked about. Clean air, I know y'all worked on, and mortgage debt reduction. Tell me why you took the political risk of supporting and really pushing Stratton, who could possibly become the 6th, I think, woman of color to come out in this country as a member of the U.S. Senate.
I'm going to correct you just on one thing. It's hard to do that. It's sitting on stage with Reverend Al Sharpton to correct you, but I'm going to add to what you said, which is not only would she be the 6th black woman ever elected to the United States Senate. By the way, our state was the first to elect a first black woman to the United States Senate, Carol Moseley Braun. And now we're going to become the second black woman to elect, first state rather, to elect a second black woman to the United States. That's the first state ever. And 2 people of color, Tammy Duckworth, who's Asian American, is our other senator. So we're going to have 2 incredible senators. So that was not your question, but I took.
I stand corrected.
That's a political. I just took a big political risk by correcting you. I will tell you, first of all, she was the absolute best person for the job. That's it, period, end of sentence. I have worked with this woman now for 9 years. She was my chosen running mate in 2017, and she's amazing. I never wanted to speak after her at an event because she's so good, you know, and she's so smart and accomplished. And we got to work together for these last 7 years, her as lieutenant governor, me as governor. And when she decided she wanted to run for United States Senate, I mean, there is no question in my mind that she would be the best person for the job. She has done so much. Example, she put forward a birth equity initiative in our state to address the fact that 3 times as many black women die from pregnancy-related conditions than white women. 3 times as many. And that's true across the country. But we needed to address it in the state of Illinois. She put that program together. She fought for it. And we are actually, I think this coming week, breaking ground on the first maternal center, a birthing center on the south side of Chicago. And even more important than that, she initiated this program to invite more and more doulas and midwives who are black to get licensed and to be engaged in the process of birthing. So important that we have culturally sensitive, culturally knowledgeable medical leaders who are doing this kind of work. And so she's responsible for that. And that's just one of many initiatives of hers. She runs our justice, equity, and inclusion endeavor for the state, which part of what she does is when we legalized cannabis in Illinois, we set aside a whole bunch of that money to address inequities that have plagued the black community over so many years. We call it the R3 program. She runs that and oversees that program, and it has put probably now over $100 million into black communities across the state of Illinois. So I'm very proud of Juliana. She's going to make you all proud too.
Since we are talking politics, the Democratic Party has the possibility of winning the midterms as far as the House of Representatives. As a shot at the U.S. Senate, what is your advice to the party as they now are challenging a narrow majority of the Republicans? What should they be doing more of, and what are they not doing enough of, in your judgment?
Well, I think there are at least 3 major topics here for the midterms, but I want to be clear about something right up front. You know, you hear a lot of people talking about fighting for democracy, which is so vitally important. We won't have a future for this country if we do not fight to preserve our democracy. So that's just a predicate to everything else. But you don't win elections talking to the public about democracy. There are obviously many of us who care deeply and understand what's going on and how they're undermining, how Donald Trump and the Republicans are undermining democracy. We need to be out there and doing everything we can to fight for it. But if you knock on 100 doors, and I've knocked on a lot of doors in my life, you knock on 100 doors and you talk to voters at the door and you say, what's the most important issue to you? 5 out of 100 will tell you democracy. They understand that it's an important predicate to everything, but what people are thinking about at the doors are, I can't pay my electric bill. I can't pay my rent. I can't afford to send my kid to community college or to college. I can't afford to retire. And these are all things that are affecting people's lives right now. So we need to be talking about that. And I know everybody uses this word affordability, but we need to talk about it in very plain language. It needs to be about lowering costs for people. And you know the best way to make things more affordable? Raise people's wages. And we ought to be, all of us, we should have done it in 2024. The people who are running in 2024, I'm running for re-election as governor in 2026. I can tell you, we need to raise the minimum wage in this country. $7.25 an hour, $14,000 a year on a full-time job. One person can't survive on that. 2 jobs, 2 full-time jobs at $7.25, one person could barely survive on that. you can't raise a family, you can't help your broader family, you can't afford anything really at $7.25. Why is our party not loud, I mean really loud, about raising the minimum wage? Juliana Stratton ran for her nomination to the United States Senate in part on raising the minimum wage to $25. We need to hear about raising the minimum wage over and over and over. And if you ask every Republican in Congress, all the ones we want to beat, if you ask every one of them, they will say they oppose raising the minimum wage. And about half of them will say they don't think we should have any minimum wage at all. And yet 80% of Americans want to see the minimum wage hiked. We should be for raising the minimum wage in the United States. That's one of many issues. A second I'll just give you is, democracy underlying it all. But a really important issue is they're taking away our voting rights. They're taking away your voting rights. And we have got to fight like hell to preserve those rights. So many people lost their lives doing it. Jesse Jackson, so proud to be from the state that Jesse Jackson called home. And I can tell you that we needed him now more than ever. The loss of Jesse Jackson is, frankly, it's almost hard to believe we're living in a world. My whole life, Jesse Jackson has been a beacon of fighting for voting rights and civil rights. And I must say, it is at this moment when all of us need to be civil rights activists. All of us. If we don't have a fair election in November, we won't have any more elections. Everybody has to show up, and you have to show up with purpose. And I don't care if Donald Trump, he's going to try to call out ICE and CBP and scare people away from the polls. Everybody, he's going to make it seem like you shouldn't vote. We need to go with purpose and push them out of the way, or at least tell them to get out of the way, and go in and vote. And all of us as governors need to protect your right to vote.
As you talk about that, we have legislation that has led to redistricting around the country, which limits people of color in a very dramatic way in terms of representation. And the Supreme Court is sitting up holding its decision on Section 2 on whether to take race out of the Voting Rights Act. So in many ways, President Kennedy's grandson was here yesterday. In many ways, with Kennedy and Johnson established Civil Rights Act 64, Voting Rights Act 65, they're in front of our face in clear view, trying to upend everything that came out of the Civil Rights Movement and led to not only helping blacks and browns, but women and others. Do you think the party ought to be really bringing that down? Because this affects rural voters. Another son of your state, Barack Obama, passed the Affordable Care Act. That affected more people in red states and helped more farmers.
And their representatives are trying to take it away.
That's right. Do you think these are the kinds of things that the National Party ought to be more clearly bringing out and not letting, my fear is that they're letting Trump set the agenda and we're reacting to what he's talking about rather than acting on what people are concerned about?
I'm so glad you said that because, I mean, you're right. So much of what's been happening is really a reaction to the everyday beating everybody over the head that Donald Trump has been doing every day. I'm sure you're feeling it. I remember 6 months into Joe Biden's term, I thought, wow, it's so quiet. Do you remember? Because it was so loud every day with Donald Trump, and now we're back in this mode again. Yes, there's a lot of reacting. We need to be proactive. Here's the one thing that we should take away and learn from what Donald Trump has done. He came into office with an agenda, and he essentially has invoked and gotten passed almost all of his agenda in a year. We need to have our agenda, and we need to make sure we pass it in a first year of a Democratic administration. And it needs to be bold. And it needs to include the restoration of voting rights. I want to say proudly that my state has elected more black congressmen and women than any other state in the country. And it should be that we're bragging about a whole bunch of states competing for that. But when they take away voting rights, it makes it harder and harder and harder. But I'm telling you, in my state, we expanded voting rights. We already did that by state law. We made it easier for people to vote. We made it easier for you to vote by mail. You can now check a box when you vote and say, I want to vote by mail every time, and then you have the opportunity to get a ballot in the mail every single time, if that's what makes it easier for you to vote. We have drop boxes. We have tried to make it available to everybody. Voting is perhaps the most important thing that we've got to expand the rights of. But the agenda, and I'll call it Agenda 48, because the 48th president of the United States, who's going to be a Democrat, has got to have an agenda that's bold and gets passed right away.
The agenda is going to lead to a Democrat, you say, in the White House in 28. Are you going to be that Democrat?
I feel like I'm on Price is Right. People are yelling out the answer, you know. Be bold, he says. First of all, I'm running for re-election as governor right now. Everybody from Illinois, can I count on your vote? All right, I love it. So let me tell you, vitally important to me. I've been involved in every presidential election in one fashion or another, probably since, in fact, I know, since I was an adult and able to vote. I've been involved in some fashion or another. And I'm going to be more involved than ever before in 2028 because we can't lose. And have you looked at, first of all, I mean, we can all look at, the bar has been set real low by the guy in office today. The most corrupt president in my lifetime, and that's saying something because I was alive during Richard Nixon. So we have a pretty good bench. In fact, you've invited so many of them to come right here, and they've been on this stage, or they're going to be. So that's my answer. My answer is, I don't know what I'll be doing after. I hope I win re-election after, but I can tell you this: I'm going to fight like hell to elect a Democrat in 2028.
So that you're not ruling it out.
Reverend, whatever I decide to do, I really mean this. I start with what's going to be best for the people of the state of Illinois. That really is my number one, it's my starting point for everything, because I want to make sure that we're advancing the cause of particularly the most vulnerable, the working families of Illinois, the middle class in Illinois. That's who we are as Democrats. That's who I am as a Democrat. I mean, we're the party of the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. We're the party of Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. We need to be fighting to preserve those things, but it was really all about centering on the people who need it most, and people in my state need help.
Whoever is the candidate for the Democratic Party, including you, they will have to face the aftermath of Donald Trump. How do a candidate, whoever, deal with an opponent who will probably be one of his sycophants, either Rubio or Vance? How do we show a vision for the country rather than just going back and forth with brickbats with Trump and his sycophants?
Well, Trump isn't going to be on the ballot in 2028. I know he'd like to be, but he's not going to be on the ballot in 2028. He is not. So that is not who we're running against in 2028. I don't want you to overlook, though, that in 2026 we are battling Donald Trump, and we ought to be fighting him every single day, because every day he's in office, he's taking something away. And every day you let an authoritarian have their way is another day that we are losing power, the people of the United States. So, look, the way you deal with it is start with what is going to lift up the most vulnerable people in our country, what's going to lift up those who've been left out and left behind. What's going to lift up working families across the United States? We ought to be focused and centered on that. That's who we are as Democrats. That is how we win. Talking about the issues, not, as you said, throwing brickbats or calling them names, but rather, what is the agenda going forward? How do we protect people's rights and lift them up so people are earning more money, so people can pay their bills? And by the way, one last thing about this paying the bills thing. We got to not only make sure that people are earning enough and paying their bills, but people can't afford to just take a few days off anymore. We implemented paid leave in my state. People deserve to have the opportunity to take time off and maybe go on vacation. You don't have to go to Timbuktu, but you might be able to get in your car. Oh, these days you can't afford to do that because Donald Trump took us into a war. But you ought to be able to get in your car and drive somewhere and just spend a couple of days with your family. People can't afford to do that anymore. So that has got to be part also of the agenda about fighting for what, livability is really what I think our agenda needs to be.
All right, let's give a hand. Governor of Illinois, JB Pritzker.